Welcome back to my latest Doctor Who retrospective.
Last time I looked at each classic Doctor's debut story, so let's do the same for the Doctors of the Revival. First of all, now that we're discussing stories that actually aired in my lifetime, nostalgia will unavoidably play a role here.
As for my fan credentials, I saw the odd episode growing up but didn't properly start watching till late 2009. As a result, the original Russell T Davies era doesn't necessarily have the same magic for me that it has for a lot of other people my age.
To me, this is all Doctor Who, and I'll try to view it as objectively as I can when discussing these individual episodes.
From the 2005 series opener to the 2023 Christmas special, which of our 21st century Doctors had the best introduction?
During the wilderness years, fans who'd loved the show as kids were now grown up, and some were even working in television. 3 of those kids were Chris Chibnall, Stephen Moffat, and the writer of this first episode, Russell T Davies. Known for revolutionary dramas like Queer as Folk and The Second Coming, Russell always wanted to write for his favourite show, and had his first series cooking away in the back of his mind for many years. And in 2003, Doctor Who was finally announced to be returning to screens with Russell at the helm. The following year, Second Coming star Christopher Eccleston was unveiled as the 9th Doctor, and a year after that, the Doctor finally made his fantastic return.
Rose is a relatively simple story, but it's clear just how much thought went into how to introduce the Doctor's world to a modern audience.
Instead of opening on an alien planet or overloading audiences with mythology, Rose begins in a normal world of traffic, buses and shopping. It's far removed from what many viewers expect from the show and immediately establishes the grounded contemporary tone Russell was aiming for. The classic series was unavoidably steeped in middle-class BBC English, something the Revival wanted to avoid, with distinctly working-class characters and a Doctor who talks less like a man from another world and more like a very smart guy at the pub. The essentials of Doctor Who are slowly introduced and recontextualised in this modern setting, with Rose asking if anyone else knows about the Autons especially standing out to me on this rewatch. This one-take walk from the Powell estate is a great moment of exposition and character dialogue, outlining the rules and basics of the show without the need for callbacks or continuity. While the TV movie made the mythology integral to its narrative, Rose largely ignores the previous 40 years and instead confidently marches forward into the 21st century. Even the returning Autons are never named on screen, and the moment when the Nestene consciousness calls the Doctor a Time Lord is very easy to miss. This is Rose's episode. Almost every scene is from her perspective, it's her journey we follow, and in this first series, she's arguably the real star of the show. She's immediately set apart from previous companions with a fleshed out family life and her young age, making her the perfect audience surrogate in 2005. She takes some cues from Ace with her age and class, but the image of these screaming companions still lingered in the minds of viewers, which is likely why Rose's journey takes centre stage.
She doesn't connect with me as much as other companions, but I completely understand why Billie Piper's performance captured the public's imagination back in 2005.
Suddenly, this dusty, impenetrable sci-fi show was centred on a normal young woman, allowing a generation of children to enter the TARDIS through her. The Autons are lovingly recreated and modernised with great costumes and creepy sound design. Shop window dummies springing to life and killing people works just as well 30 years on, and it's honestly surprising they haven't had another dedicated story since. This also leads to the greatest Doctor Who monster of all time, Plastic Mickey.
Don't think that's gonna stop me.
The London setting feels bustling, alive and tangibly real, adding a level of believability while putting to rest the old wobbly sets cliché. But how does the Doctor translate to this modern setting? Christopher Eccleston has been open about his personal issues with the production and seems unsatisfied with his performance, but I honestly think he's great here. Like Tom Baker before him, he arrives fully formed and beaming with charm and a commanding presence. He has a great wit, his outbursts feel natural, and he carries all the essential ingredients of the classic Doctors while making the part his own. It's not just the northern accent, but the unapologetic, this is who I am and what I do attitude, and some of that upper-class authority figureness stripped away. I love how he effortlessly delivers technobabble, and his chemistry with Billie is already great, establishing the Doctor and Rose as equals. Unlike previous Doctor debuts, this isn't explicitly a post-regeneration story. He's clearly regenerated recently, since he takes a moment to comment on his new face, but it's evident a lot has happened since his last appearance in 1996, and this was absolutely the right approach. Opening the revived series with a fully formed Doctor freed this episode from the baggage of dealing with those post-regeneration hijinks and allows Chris's Doctor to be more mysterious and intriguing.
I didn't see this story go out live, which I'm honestly kind of sad about, because it's such a big part of history. It's the beginning of a modern British institution.
Emotionally, it doesn't hook me like other episodes, and I think the iconography of it all makes it a little hard to judge objectively because of how ingrained it is into popular culture. But there's no denying how efficient this is as a mission statement for the revival. It's carefully scripted, well performed, and kicks off the series with confidence and style. The Doctor is back, and the trip of a lifetime has just begun. After a reportedly tense 9-month shoot, Christopher Eccleston decided to step down from the role. Luckily, Series 1 was such a resounding success that new Dr. David Tennant joined a show that was already a hit with audiences. Announced only weeks into the new series, despite initial plans to keep the regeneration secret, more on that here, the 10th Doctor made his full debut on Christmas Day 2005 in the first of many festive specials to come. And although it's currently so bright outside I can barely see the screen I'm writing on, let's talk about Christmas. Introducing a new Doctor during the festive season was a smart decision. TV is a big part of Christmas for a lot of families, so launching Tennant's Doctor on the day itself ensures a big opening night. It may walk like an alien invasion movie, but the holiday setting makes it feel even grander with Santa robots, killer trees, and the whole nation brought together by an alien threat. The Doctor being bedbound nicely raises the stakes and allows the Sycorax to be a more menacing threat. When it comes to one-off monsters, they're definitely up there with a brilliant design and the mix of medieval and sci-fi in their technology. I also love the twist with their masks and their grotesque appearance under them. Continuing Davy's more grounded approach, Rose's reaction to the Doctor changing is the emotional through line of the story. I like that her unspoken feelings for the Doctor are acknowledged, with her taking his regeneration more personally than previous companions. Her breakdown halfway through nicely mirrors how new fans might have felt being introduced to this concept for the first time. I love seeing the Tylers and Mickey trying to save the day without the Doctor, with Rose even trying to be him as she name drops the Shadow Proclamation like he often does. But they're not the only ones fighting off the Sycorax, with this story also closely following the British government led by Harriet Jones. Penelope Wilton is as great as ever, and I love her deadpan delivery of some of these lines.
You seem to be talking about aliens as a matter of fact.
There's an act of Parliament banning my autobiography.
The government and Guinevere 1 scenes lend a different perspective to the invasion and allow this Christmas Day attack to feel more significant and believable.
But what about David Tennant's first performance?
All these years later, he rivals Tom Baker as the most popular Doctor, and it's clear why he was such a hit. He's so much fun as this swashbuckling adrenaline junkie who doesn't always recognise the danger he puts people in. But unlike Tom and Chris, I don't think David's Doctor arrived fully formed. He's still figuring the character out, and plays it a bit madder than we'd see later on, which he still does well, but the 10th Doctor's personality develops so much throughout his era that the version of him we end the Christmas invasion with isn't quite the one we'd see in future stories. I'd argue it's not until The Girl in the Fireplace or even the Series 2 finale that both David and the team have fully worked out the character, as he's put in more challenging stories and settings. But that's not to knock his first full outing. Coming into the story in the last act, David enters with a real swagger, and giving him a big hero moment with the duel against the Sycorax was a great way for him to win over Rose and the audience. It's quintessentially Doctor-y, but feels specific to this Doctor. The no second chances scene is played a little too fast for me, but it's an important part of his character that does come back many times. His brutal takedown of Harriet Jones also demonstrates that he's much quicker to anger than his predecessor, and has a real dark streak when challenged.
Conceived as a standalone special, it's pretty accessible to new viewers, I think because the threat is so earthbound and relatable.
Any recurring characters are nicely reintroduced, there's a great new monster, and we end with the promise of more adventures. David even takes a page out of his future father-in-law's book by repeating the catchphrase of a previous Doctor.
And it is gonna be fantastic.
It could probably do with a bit more David since he's in bed for most of it, but this nicely builds anticipation for when he finally emerges in the finale. While his characterization is in its early stages, there's plenty of room to develop across the next season. It's one of the strongest festive episodes thanks to a movie-sized conceit and a holiday setting that feels integrated rather than a mandate. The Christmas Invasion is another hit for the series, proving that the 2005 revival was here to stay. And staying power it had. The David Tennant years saw the show reach record viewing figures and critical acclaim, with Doctor Who back in the hearts of the nation. But in October 2008, at the height of his powers, David announced live on television that he was stepping down for the 2010 series.
When Doctor Who returns in 2010, it won't be with me.
A few months later, Matt Smith was announced as the 11th Doctor via a jump cut on Doctor Who Confidential.
So you know how I didn't see those first 2 stories live? I mean, also the previous 8, but in my defense, I wasn't conceived when those went out. So naturally, I don't have the same connection to them that many other fans have. I began properly watching the show at the tail end of the 2009 specials, and tuned in New Year's Day 2010 to watch David Tennant regenerate. I think what I'm trying to say is...
My turn, assholes!
The pressure on Matt Smith was insane.
He's been pretty open about the anxiety he went through, hitting his pillow at night in frustration and even calling his dad 2 months into filming when the nerves kicked in. When he was first announced, fans and tabloids immediately started judging him. He's too young, he's not David. Matt even had people in the streets telling him not to break the show. Now, obviously Jodie and Ncuti have faced more intense backlash from those kind of people, but it's still important to recognise what a challenge the Series 5 premiere was. In just an hour, Matt Smith and new showrunner Stephen Moffat had to convince fans, general audiences, and even some people at the BBC that Doctor Who could continue without its flagship star.
I'm saying all this to illustrate how astonishing it is that despite all that hype and baggage, the 11th hour bloody worked.
This is easily the most confident debut so far simply because it makes it look effortless. Stephen Moffat has woven one of his sharpest ever scripts, with every scene brimming with character, great dialogue, and a dozen key plot points and setups.
Every time I watch it I notice something new, and I've seen this story a lot. I own 3 versions of it.
Hell, Series 5 was the subject of my dissertation, where I analysed the series through the structure of classic fairy tales, which was the tone Moffat was going for. Opening with a young girl making a wish and a magical box landing in her backyard, there are clear echoes of the line The Witch in the Wardrobe and Tom's Midnight Garden, immediately distancing the show from the contemporary realism of RTD. The whole thing feels magical, and it's a testament to the writing and the performances of Smith and Caitlin Blackwood that this story of a strange man befriending a young girl doesn't seem creepy. This fairy tale vibe even stretches to the show's visuals, with some beautiful cinematography in Amy's garden and Adam Smith's stunning direction. Even the simplistic design of the monsters feels consistent with this storybook feel, with both Prisoner Zero and the Atraxi resembling kids' drawings or something out of Monsters Inc. Before starring in the highest grossing films of all time, Karen Gillan was lighting up the screen with this cynical, adventurous Scottish girl in an English village. She instantly clicks with Matt, and while she definitely has flaws as a character with how dismissive she is to Rory, Series 5 is essentially her coming-of-age story, and we see her overcome these flaws over the following episodes. The scene with the apple where she begins to accept the Doctor is her imaginary friend is just beautiful, and reflects that rekindling of childhood imagination that's at the core of this season. Having Amy meet the new Doctor as a child first was also a great idea. To her, he's always been Matt Smith, and because of the story she's built around him, she has the same mythic view that the audience has. He doesn't have to convince her he's the same man. He just needs to convince her to believe in impossible things again, like a time traveller who fell from the sky and likes fish fingers and custard, which I have tried because I am indeed that sad. Arthur Darvill is instantly lovable as Rory, and the cast is surprisingly star-studded, with Olivia Colman, Nina Wadia, Patrick Moore.
Oh, I like Patrick Moore.
I'll get you his number, but watch him, he's a devil.
And even the voice of Pingu. No, really.
But let's finally discuss Matt Smith. God, he's good, isn't he?
Matt just arrives fully formed as this mad adventurer with a childlike wonder for the universe. His quirks feel natural, he carries himself with what can only be described as a calculated clumsiness, and yet also shows great compassion to Amy and her younger self. He's literally running around in the tattered remains of Tennant's costume, and yet completely owns the role, to the point where you practically forget the character was played by someone else a few months earlier. He just gets it, completely understanding Moffat's take on the character, and makes the part his while still taking some cues from the past. He does such a good job with this that I didn't even notice he repeats one of David Tennant's most famous catchphrases at one point.
What?
Come on.
What?
Come on!
want.
That doesn't feel like a callback, it feels fully integrated into his performance, and for as widely discussed as his age was, his youthful appearance honestly adds to all this.
Matt was only a few years older than me when he shot The 11th Hour, terrifying I know, and yet I completely believe he's a centuries-old man with a young man's face. Moffat once described him as a young man built by old men from memory, which in itself is magical. I've used that word a lot, and that's because this story really is magical to me. I'm completely engrossed every time I watch it. I laugh at the funny moments, I'm moved by the heartfelt moments, and by God, I'm always pumping my fists at that scene on the hospital roof. Despite being confined to one small town, this story still feels grand and epic, and Ledworth is very fleshed out in this one episode. I just love this delightfully boring British town where everyone knows everyone, and Amy's imaginary friend is a local celebrity. It's relatable yet still very idyllic and picture book.
As an introduction to the show, this is a great place to start.
The 11th Doctor's era saw Doctor Who find a huge audience in America, so for a lot of international viewers, this was their introduction. It's just the right length, with each scene advancing the story, and the conclusion is greatly satisfying and exciting for a season premiere. I had just started my journey as a fan when I first watched it, and this was the perfect gateway into the Whoniverse. I may have liked Doctor Who before the 11th Hour, but I loved it by the time those credits rolled. Matt's whimsical, nerdy doctor and his friendship with the girl who waited immediately captured my imagination, and I quickly ran out into the garden reenacting all the scenes and making up my own adventures. 14 years later...
14 years!
14 years since fish custard.
This is still a brilliant hour of TV and a bold, unapologetic mission statement for the new era.
Despite everything working against them, Matt Smith and the entire creative team delivered a debut story that masterfully reinvents the show and somehow made it look easy.
In the middle of the 50th anniversary year, Matt Smith announced he would be stepping down after the commemorative specials in the winter. 2 months later, in a live show I still haven't watched to this day, seriously, put it on iPlayer, Peter Capaldi was unveiled as the 12th Doctor, leading to about a year of these kind of videos.
Hordes of robots. Life is interesting at last. I've been so bored for the last 2 years.
The 2014 series was surrounded by leaks, rampant spoilers, and even a world tour.
Finally, just before I started high school, Deep Breath premiered on BBC One and I was on holiday. Don't worry, I watched it the night I got back. Revisiting this story nearly a decade later, I'm kind of underwhelmed by it.
While the 11th Hour has a sheen of confidence, Deep Breath feels weirdly insecure, like it's genuinely worried about fans not warming to this Doctor. And understandably, Peter Capaldi was a very different leading man to what many modern viewers were used to with his older age. It might be hard to believe given how beloved Peter's Doctor is in 2024, but there was a real concern around his age and if the show could still connect with younger viewers.
I hope he's a good actor because he's not hot. I'm not okay with that.
Shut up!
This uncertainty is reflected through Clara, since she was clearly developing feelings for Matt Smith's Doctor. Losing him is a huge shock, and she's not even sure she wants to continue travelling at one point. Series 8 attempts a similar arc to what was intended with the 6th Doctor, where he begins as a more difficult and morally ambiguous character before finding himself in the finale, so it makes sense 12 doesn't fully settle in until later in his run.
Even with this foreknowledge, this series opener feels very slow and uneven.
The comedy's hit and miss, and the script feels padded to fit the extended runtime with an especially slow first half. Even individual scenes don't feel as polished, with the Vale scene being a great example of a solid concept that doesn't fully translate to the screen, and I'm not sure what it's saying, if anything. The story doesn't truly come alive until the restaurant scene. Jenna and Peter hit it off with electric chemistry, the clockwork droids are genuinely threatening, and the episode culminates in a pretty satisfying finale. The droids are completely reinvented from their previous appearance in The Girl in the Fireplace, with some great practical effects and embracing the body horror. Peter Ferdinando's half-faced man is a chilling villain, and I like that his constant rebuilding and losing himself mirrors the effects of regeneration. The sequence of Clara holding her breath is genuinely scary, with the drawn-out echoing score and Jenna Coleman's performance. It's a standout story for Clara, with some of her bravest and most powerful moments in which Jenna excels. As divisive a character as she's become, we should always remember how lucky we were to have such a talented performer on the show, and Jenna has rightfully gone on to great things. Ben Wheatley, who directed one of the weirdest horror movies I've ever seen a year earlier, impresses with a very good looking episode, but there are some really weird moments of editing with abrupt cuts and unnecessary slow-mo and a pretty ugly grade on a lot of the scenes. Maybe it's meant to represent the smogginess of Victorian London, but it results in some very artificial looking scenes. Peter Capaldi is easily one of the best actors to ever play the Doctor. There are signs of great things to come, especially in his confrontation with the half-faced man and his excitement realising he's Scottish, but I don't think this story was the best place to introduce his Doctor. Some of the comedy feels out of place, with Peter fitting the dry wit much better, and while he's more developed by the end, this is only the beginning of his journey. Overall, he's given plenty of standout moments and lines and has a real command over the screen, but Peter's best stories are yet to come.
12 changed a lot over his 3 seasons, with the version of him we got from late Series 9 onwards easily being my favourite. In comparison, this early characterisation doesn't feel as fleshed out, and the script is clearly still finding its feet with Peter in the role.
But I love his delivery, how scary he is at times, and even his little James Bond moment, making it clear that we have a very special Doctor here. In a first for a Doctor debut, we get a cameo from the previous incarnation, with the 11th Doctor calling Clara shortly before he regenerates. This scene tends to divide people, with some seeing it as taking the limelight from Peter, but for me, this is very effective. For one thing, Matt's Doctor employed time travel like a superpower, so seeing him bend the laws of time once again to comfort his friend is very touching. But on a metatextual level, it's literally and figuratively the previous Doctor approving of the new one. It's made abundantly clear that they're the same person, and I especially like the moment where the 12th Doctor explains his frustration that Clara won't see him as the same man. It's the kind of scene the twin dilemma desperately needed, and makes for a lovely bookend to the episode.
As a jumping on point, Deep Breath isn't very accessible.
Tonally, it's very different from the previous seasons, but retains much of the core cast and continuity, so there's less of a clean slate like with the 11th Hour. Clara's grief and the admittance that there was some romantic attachment between her and the Doctor also requires a full season of context to appreciate. The presence of the Paternoster gang also feels a little misleading for an opening episode, since they don't return at all in Peter's tenure. 2017's The Pilot, on the other hand, was conceived as a new episode 1, so is arguably a more fitting introduction to 12's era. Overall, Deep Breath gets a lot right, but with an inconsistent script and poor pacing, it struggles to fully utilise its new Doctor, despite an entertaining second half. Not the worst, but a real step down from previous debuts. In 2017, Jodie Whittaker made headlines across the world when she was unveiled as the 13th Doctor.
And of course, the internet responded to this very normally.
It's gonna be shit. I'm officially done. Bye, Doctor Who.
I think it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. It makes me very angry.
A lot of red, angry faces.
That all just looks like straight up BS.
We should bomb the BBC studios. What's wrong with people?
Yeah, the Jodie Whittaker era of Doctor Who under showrunner Chris Chibnall has become one of the most divisive periods in the show's history. But then again, so was the Capaldi era when that was airing, and now it's been reassessed as a golden age, so maybe the same will happen here. Sadly, casting the first female Doctor and a move towards a more diverse team in front of and behind the camera meant the show soon became a target for reactionary outlets and public figures. We had YouTubers spinning racist conspiracies, an MP linking Jodie's casting to stabbings, and talk radio having to break Ofcom regulations to complain about the show. The past few years have not been a fun time to be a Whovian, and for all the valid criticisms of the Chibnall era you can make, I think this manufactured outrage driven by bigots to make the show a culture war talking point did more harm to its popularity than anything the series itself did.
And I hope this doesn't become the 13th Doctor's legacy, because I honestly enjoyed these seasons. Definitely not as much as previous series, but I always had fun tuning in on a Sunday night, and I appreciate this change in pace for the show.
And this opening story is an especially fun start to Jodie's tenure. Contrary to what historical revisionists will have you believe, The Woman Who Fell to Earth was a big hit with audiences, receiving great viewing figures and reviews and reinvigorated discussion and hype around the show. I remember talking to so many people who weren't fans who were enjoying her early episodes, and I think this has been forgotten in the sea of reactionary articles and million-hour video essays. Sadly, I don't think Series 11 quite sustained this momentum, but it's worth acknowledging acknowledging that this was a successful relaunch back in 2018, and the 13th Doctor certainly has a big fan following. The new cinematic aesthetic is instantly noticeable, with some great cinematography bringing the Sheffield setting to life. There's a great urban atmosphere, matching the autumnal release date, and it has the right mix of the epic and domestic which all the best Doctor Who has. This story also introduces an ensemble cast, as Chris Chibnall's family ITV drama vision for the series comes into play, and while I don't think the fam were developed enough to justify how long they stayed on, this first episode does a decent job establishing their characters, especially when it comes to assembling Team TARDIS, with Yaz's role as a police officer giving her a clear reason to be on the train and to interact with Ryan at the start. At first, this seems to be Ryan's story, but it organically expands into an ensemble when the characters are united by the Doctor. He's a difficult character to judge, since personally I always got the sense he was written to be younger than he is, and having to perform with a different accent, Tosin Cole can't bring as much of himself to the role. But in this episode, I honestly like him. He's a normal guy struggling with normal things, and I believe his pain and frustration in that final scene on the hill. We also get the Chase's very own Bradley Walsh as Graham, who's more of a supporting role here, but made likeable with his complete disinterest in alien activity and his eulogy to Grace. Mandit Gill is believable as Yaz and strikes up a good bond with the group, although later episodes seem to struggle with what to do with her. The team dynamic really shines here, with each character contributing to the story, and there's plenty of backstory established to develop over the next season. Not all of this comes into play later, and Yaz didn't get much focus in Series 11, but Ryan's relationship with Graham and his dad does get a good payoff in later stories. The Stenser is a solid monster with a great design and accompanying theme, and his wearing teeth is such a fun, grotesque idea. Tim Shaw is essentially a loser among his kind, and seeing the Doctor take the piss out of him is a lot of fun.
But now let's discuss the 13th Doctor herself, played by my home slice Jodie Whittaker.
I appreciate that despite the endless debate surrounding a woman playing the role, her gender is largely irrelevant. The script wisely characterises her as the Doctor first and foremost, and like her predecessors, she instantly takes charge and marches forward undeterred by her new body. While some of her dialogue feels overwritten, I get a good sense of who she is by the halfway point. She's hopeful, childlike, and filled with excitement and wonder, which Jodie just nails. I love her big hero entrance with that fist-pumping rendition of the main theme, plus a great stunt on the crane. For me, she doesn't settle in as well as previous actors, but I feel like I know the 13th Doctor by the end of the story, and I've always got a smile on my face when she's on screen. Especially after 12, who at the best of times was somewhat ignorant to people's emotions, it's nice to see her go to extra lengths to apologise and ensure her new friend's safety.
I don't always believe the technobabble and some of the more gimmicky Doctor dialogue, but I always believe in her wonder, her kindness, and her ability to smile in the face of danger, which is what makes the 13th Doctor so endearing.
She also rocks that ragged version of 12's outfit. The family drama element works well with the addition of Sharon D. Clarke as Grace. She's wonderful here, and her death becomes a moving emotional through line through Series 11, with her eulogy being especially heartfelt. It helps to establish early on that the Doctor's lifestyle is dangerous, which gives more weight to the fam's decision to stay with her a few episodes later. There are some clunky moments with the usual cliche of mention family member before I die being really forced, and the backstory of Rahul and his lost sister which feels unnecessary. Overall, the dialogue isn't as sharp as in previous stories, but Chibnall has a knack for writing great confrontations with villains. Also, how can you not love Salad Man?
Eat my salad. Halloween.
On my first viewing, I wasn't sure what to think. Seeing my Twitter feed ranting that the show had been saved from the previous era felt a little disheartening as a big fan of Moffat's tenure, and Series 11's back-to-basics approach took some getting used to. But subsequent viewings have been quite rewarding, and I appreciate what a good jumping-on point this is. The mythology is kept to a minimum, the word Time Lord isn't even mentioned, and I love the mystery surrounding the Doctor's regeneration and that great cliffhanger. After years of Doctor Who being incredibly lore-heavy with complex stories and arcs, it was time for a more stripped-back version of the show. The Woman Who Fell to Earth does exactly what it needs to: establish the new cast, sell viewers on the new Doctor while acting as an entry point for new fans, and it's very functional in that regard. It's a fun, atmospheric season opener and a solid debut for the 13th Doctor.
And now that I've been nice to a Chris Chibnall episode, leave my comments alone!
And we're nearly up to date as we jump to the 60th anniversary and the first of 3 commemorative specials. In a surprise to anyone who wasn't chronically on Doctor Who Twitter, Jodie Whittaker suddenly regenerated into David Tennant in the final moments of The Power of the Doctor. A year later, the 14th Doctor was reunited with Donna Noble to take on a monster from the pages of Marvel Comics. Former showrunner Russell T Davies returned to the show, and with a new streaming partner and a new Doctor waiting in the wings, a bold new era was upon us. I wasn't sure whether to include this story as a Doctor debut because it just doesn't serve the same purpose. Not only have we already met David's Doctor, but we also knew Ncuti Gatwa was set to take over 2 weeks later, so it barely establishes a new direction for the show.
The Star Beast has more in common with a legacy sequel like The Force Awakens, revisiting familiar characters as they go up against a new threat.
But since it's confirmed in The Giggle that the 14th Doctor is indeed a true incarnation and he's officially recognised as a mainline Doctor by the BBC, the Star Beast technically counts. Plus you guys voted for this, so let's talk about it. If you've been watching me for a while, you'll know I have a complicated relationship with David Tennant's Doctor, recognising him as a great version of the character, but often frustrated with the overhyped culture around him and the inability of some viewers and even the BBC to move on from him. So when it was confirmed that David would officially be the 14th Doctor, I was very sceptical.
But now the dust is settling on these specials, I can safely say I like 14.
The reality of Tennant being older adds new layers to his performance. He's not just 10 again, he's the same character with all the growth of his last 3 incarnations, even overcoming some of 10's character flaws. Rewatching the 10th Doctor era, it's kind of hilarious how bad he is at expressing emotions, often just being stoic and quickly turning to anger in a crisis. 14, on the other hand, is openly emotional, even surprising himself at times.
I absolutely love her. Oh, do I say things like that now?
And an all-around wiser and humbler character. I'm not sure I'll ever be 100% on board bringing back a previous Doctor in such an official capacity, but as a one-off for the specials, David really shines with a new angle on his most iconic character. He's not missed a beat and could probably play this character in his sleep at this point. I also love his new costume, which retains the feel of his original look while also feeling unique and quintessentially Doctor-y. Donna is still a great multifaceted character, and seeing her happily settled with a loving family is very heartwarming. She finally gets to reconnect with the Doctor and saves the day once again, with Catherine slipping back into the role like no time has passed. The Meep is a fantastic alien with a great mix of practical and digital effects and a hilarious vocal performance from Miriam Margolyes. Even if you know the twist from the comic, the moment they reveal their true nature is just delightfully evil. Having recently read said comic, this is a decent adaptation, taking the same beats and structure but incorporating modern elements like the Noble family. The script has great action and set pieces, but it's hurt by the lack of a clear point of view character. Most stories like this are told through the companion's eyes, but since we already know Donna and are familiar with David's Doctor, there's no point of identification for new viewers. Rose, while brought to life admirably by Esben Finney, feels underdeveloped despite being an obvious choice to lead the episode. If the story was focused on her discovering the Meep and working with the Doctor to help her mum, that would have allowed the special to function better as a jumping on point. This moment especially,
after all these years, I'm finally me,
would also hit harder if Rose was the central protagonist, otherwise it just feels tacked on. Reviewing this story as a Doctor debut feels almost unfair since it occupies a unique place in the Whoniverse.
It's an anniversary special continuing a story arc from 2008 that's also technically a third of a Doctor's tenure. There's just too much on its plate, making the introduction of the 14th Doctor less of a priority.
As a special, it's an entertaining, nostalgic watch, but with how much it needs to establish and resolve in just an hour, it struggles to be anything more. The focus on characters from the past also makes it an odd place to introduce the show to the new international audience despite the opening recap. I enjoyed it, but it's hard to know what terms to judge it by, and its inclusion here is largely due to technicality. As a Doctor Who episode, The Star Beast is very entertaining, but as a Doctor debut and introduction to the show, it's inevitably compromised. In the climax to the final anniversary special, The Giggle, Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor emerged in the show's first bi-generation. I had mixed feelings about this plot point, more on that here, but Ncuti immediately made a strong impression and I was very excited for his full debut at Christmas. With the show returning to its Christmas Day slot, this special goes all out with the festivities, opening with a haunting rendition of Carol of the Bells, a snowy churchyard right out of a holiday card, and goblins.
I had fun with the anniversary specials, but for me, this was the real start to Doctor Who's new era.
No returning characters or monsters, this is a definitive clean slate to welcome new fans. Much like Rose back in 2005, The Church on Ruby Road introduces the Doctor's world through the eyes of a companion, with Ruby Sunday, played by Millie Gibson, being the primary focus. Russell takes some cues from Stephen Moffat's era, with a fantastical storybook opening and incorporating Ruby into the season arc. But making her special doesn't detract from her relatability, as Ruby is still a believable and endearing character thanks to Millie's great performance. She's funny, heartfelt, and the moment where she fights back tears over the phone is particularly effective. Millie is such an expressive performer, making her a great match for Ncuti's flamboyant Doctor. The story also takes cues from Moffat's timey-wimey narratives, with an extended sequence set in a broken timeline, visually represented with a literal crack through Ruby's family home. There are echoes of It's a Wonderful Life, with a glimpse into a world without the lead character, and even Labyrinth, with children being stolen by goblins. Sadly, this Goblin King doesn't look like David Bowie. It's a simple story without the scope of the Christmas invasion, but it feels just right for Christmas Day, and allows for plenty of time to get to know Ruby and this new Doctor. Revisiting all these episodes for this retrospective, I've concluded that only 4 actors arrived fully formed as the Doctor. No actor gave a terrible debut performance, but they either begin as a very different character to the one they eventually settle into, or still feel like they're finding their feet.
The 4 Doctors I think immediately settled in are Christopher Eccleston, Tom Baker, Matt Smith, and yes, Ncuti Gatwa.
I know it's early days, but come on, who wasn't instantly charmed by that smile, his delivery, his laugh? He's just the Doctor through and through, and the production team struck gold with this casting. Ncuti brings so much of himself to the role while also respecting the legacy of the show. I believe him as a centuries-old traveller who still hasn't lost his appetite for adventure, and he lights up every scene he's in with a magnetic presence. Few Doctors could get away with calling people honey, but my god, he owns it. He excels at the comedy, the exposition, he really is the full package, and I hope this is just the beginning of many more adventures to come. There's even a nice callback to his foresight in the TV movie, when the Doctor knows the future of the police officer knowing his proposal will be successful. It's a really sweet moment that was apparently added at the request of Disney executives, proving that additional input can greatly enhance a story. The emotional openness of 14 continues with the Doctor quickly finding a connection in Ruby, and he's visibly distraught when she's erased from time. Russell not only takes cues from Moffat's run, but also draws on Chris Chibnall's timeless child mythology. This contentious bit of lore is cleverly woven into the story in a subtle thematic way, giving Ruby and the Doctor common ground, with them both being foundlings. I love how he seems to surprise himself when he realises, possibly for the first time, that he's also adopted. I really appreciate that this facet of lore wasn't just swept under the rug to satisfy fans who wanted everything Chibnall did to be unwritten. Instead, these revelations offer new narrative opportunities and create a special connection between the Doctor and their new friend. Ncuti also plays this moment beautifully. It's very understated, but I love the quiet acceptance of his past.
I'm adopted.
As I explained before, this is a pretty small scale story, focusing on Ruby and her family, with the goblins coming in later. Davina McCall makes her second appearance on Doctor Who and my YouTube channel, and I was fully convinced the episode actually killed her off when I first watched it. The Sunday family is a great unit, with Cherry's never-ending quest for tea.
Where is my blasted tea?
And Michelle Greenidge gives an especially powerful performance as Carla, in both the regular timeline and as the bitter alternate version. Her monologue to the Doctor is surprisingly dark, and plays into the It's a Wonderful Life influences, showing the impact one person can have on the world. The goblins are a lot of fun. I would have liked a few more hijinks with them terrorising London, really playing into the Gremlins vibe, but they're a great mix of practical costumes and VFX, and the science based on coincidence is such a cool concept. The pirate ship in the sky is a great image, the set feels ripped right out of a Jim Henson production, and shoot me, but I like the Goblin song. It's silly and campy, but perfect for the fantastical tone, and it's not like it breaks the universe. It's clearly diegetic, and Ruby's less than smooth rhyming suggests that she and the Doctor are just freestyling. Also, damn, Ncuti's got some pipes on him.
And that's when we start. Hey!
Is there anything this guy can't do?
Following on from 2 years of miniseries, specials, and anniversary celebrations, this was the first real jumping on point the show had had in a while, and I think it works on that level.
It requires no prior knowledge to enjoy, and conveys the mix of domestic, fantastical stories Doctor Who can tell, while also establishing the Doctor as an enigmatic hero. Ruby serves a similar role to Rose back in 2005, as our audience surrogate, and by the end you're pretty won over by her and want to see her travelling in that TARDIS. It's full of festive imagery and action, including a great hero moment for the Doctor at the church, and the overall tone is bright and welcoming. I'm interested to see how many fans in the future describe this as their entry point to the show, especially with the new audience through Disney+. With 2 great lead performances, a magical Christmassy narrative, and plenty of action and comedy to keep you hooked, this was a great start for the 15th Doctor.
And there you go, that's all 15 Doctor debuts done and dusted.
Revisiting these episodes has been interesting, and it's given me a greater appreciation of how much the show has evolved to suit the times. There are certainly recurring themes and gags in these stories, but each one feels unique, and there's no right way to introduce a Doctor. I definitely like some more than others, and I don't think each one fully succeeds in relaunching the show, but the sheer variety here made this quite a fun marathon.
But now it's time to answer the question in the title of the video. Which Doctor had the best introduction?
Now, I'm terrible at picking favourites, so had to resort to using Preference Revealer and a bit of tweaking to finalise my ranking. It was very hard to narrow down a definitive list, but I chose between stories by asking myself questions like, which is a better jumping on point, which story would I rather watch right now, and often, which one do I personally enjoy the most? It would be impossible to rank these stories in a way that would satisfy everyone, but here's my ranking of all 15 Doctor debuts. In last place, to no one's surprise, The Twin Dilemma. I'm sorry, Colin, I know it's an easy target, but the plot is unengaging, the Doctor's characterization is all over the place, and the tone is just so off-putting and cynical. Definitely a low point for the classic series, aside from some decent isolated scenes and performances. At 14, we have Time of the Rani, a significant improvement that does a decent job introducing McCoy's Doctor, but the pantomime tone and narrative kind of depletes its rewatch value. I really need to be in the right mood for this one. Possibly controversial, but in 13th place and the lowest ranking Revive series episode, Deep Breath. I love the 12th Doctor, and everything with the droids and the no breathing is great, but the rest of the episode feels especially clunky and unsure of itself. Coming in at 12th and 11th place are the Star Beast and Castrovalva respectively. David and Catherine are wonderful, and the Meep is a great monster, but since it's more of an anniversary special than an opening episode, it felt unfair ranking it higher, even if it's arguably the more entertaining story. Castrovalva's just vibes, okay? I like Peter's performance, I like that chill atmosphere, it's just nice. Number 10, the TV movie. Paul McGann's One Story holds a special place to me as my first exposure to Classic Who, and even if it struggles juggling that American reboot angle with all the lore, I still find so much to love in it. I wouldn't show it to someone to introduce them to Doctor Who, it just nicely stands alone as its own thing. In 9th place, The Woman Who Fell to Earth. A solid start to Series 11 with great atmosphere and an optimistic lead which successfully introduces Jodie's Doctor. Not sure why there's no opening titles. Number 8 is An Unearthly Child. I ranked it above 13's debut because it just has a certain magic to it, you know? That opening episode feels like the beginning of something huge, and the caveman stuff is still pretty engaging. Also, I like this mischievous, slightly scary Doctor who also smokes pipes for some reason. The Christmas Invasion comes in at number 7. I love the blockbuster premise and watching the world try to deal with an invasion without our main hero. Also, killer Christmas trees, what more do you want? Number 6 is The Church on Ruby Road. Call it recency bias, but I was very impressed with Ncuti's debut. It's a great mix of sci-fi and fantasy, it's suitably Christmassy, you don't need to watch anything else to enjoy it, it's a solid introduction. Seriously, give this one a rewatch if you didn't click with it back in December. And starting our top 5, the beginning of the revival itself, Rose. It does everything it needs to do, it packs a lot into 45 minutes, and it's the reason the new show is still running 20 years later. At number 4, The Power of the Daleks. That creepy atmosphere, the Daleks at their most formidable, and Patrick Troughton is wonderful. I'd love to see this story return to the archives one day, so we can properly judge his first performance. Number 3, Spearhead from Space. Doctor Who jumps into dazzling Technicolor with a story so memorable that writers are still taking cues from it to this day. It's exciting, action-packed, and launches the show into a new age of action and earthbound adventures. But number 2 has an ace up his sleeve, Tom Baker. Robot is so much fun. Spearhead arguably tells the stronger story, but I love this little sci-fi romp and Tom just dominates every scene he's in. Sarah Jane is great here, the Brig too, and as silly as it is, I like the conflict with that poor robot.
And finally, number 1. My favourite debut appearance for a Doctor to date is, you guessed it, the 11th Hour.
The safe choice? Maybe. The popular choice? Yeah. But the right choice? I think so. You guys overwhelmingly voted for this as your personal favourite, it frequently ranks high on other countdowns, and to this day Matt Smith still considers it one of his favourites.
But why do I think it's the best one?
If I had to narrow it down, it would be that the 11th Hour is indisputably the Doctor's story. We follow him through the early hours of his new life, and the central conflict is whether he can save the day while fighting his own body. If anything, the regeneration is an inconvenience to him, being thrown into the action without the chance to take a breath. Obviously, Amy is also a huge part of this story, and you could view them as dual protagonists, but this is first and foremost about introducing the new Doctor. It's one of the only times where they're the central focus and the main draw. Think about it, the focus of the Power of the Daleks is the Daleks. The big draw of the Christmas Invasion is the premise itself, the Christmas Invasion. Rose kinda speaks for itself, and although stories like Deep Breath and the Twin Dilemma certainly are about the Doctor, the story of the week sort of overwhelms them. The main selling point of the 11th Hour is absolutely come and see the new Doctor in action, but it also balances this with the introduction of a new companion and the monster of the week. Another key ingredient to its success is the confidence evident in every scene. The script, the direction, and Matt's performance are all completely sure of themselves, and yet it is completely accessible to new fans and viewers. A lot of this confidence likely comes from the fact this wasn't the first episode put into production. The Time of Angels kicked off the first block of shooting, while the series opener was shot in a dedicated block. This allowed the cast and creative team more time to settle into their roles before shooting commenced on the premiere episode. This same approach was used in Peter Davison's first season, with 4 to Doomsday being recorded before Castrovalva, and recently Doctor Who Unleashed revealed that 73 Yards and Dot and Bubble were the first episodes Ncuti Gatwa recorded, meaning yes, that ending was the first scene he recorded for the series. Man, that's gotta be rough. Maybe getting all the nerves out on a mid-season story allowed these actors to excel in their first chronological appearance, but I also understand the logic of shooting more linearly. The 11th Hour ticks all the boxes. It's bold, exciting, and welcoming, but still a great Doctor Who episode in its own right. It's the story that made me fall in love with the show, and all these years later it remains, in my opinion, the strongest debut for any Doctor.
But what do you think? Is it really the best one, or did I just go with the boring, safe option? Let me know your ranking in the comments below to keep this discussion going. I hope you enjoyed this very long retrospective, and I'll see you when I see you.